Hi, I'm Alex Smith from Pets Flying to Australia. I'm joined today by Wayne Bayliss, who has over 30 years' experience importing pets to Australia. He and his wife Jill own Jetfast Pet Express, who is a member of IPATA, and they specialize in the relocation of pets to and from Indonesia and Asia. Wayne, has particularly much changed since COVID's come along? Has it changed your business and how you're conducting everything?
In 30 years I've been in this business, this has been the most dramatic change, of course, that we've ever seen. And that would go to all pet relocators. So we had to change our business model, that we couldn't help everybody. Our business is only a small business, family business, and we're receiving over 100 emails a day requesting information. So we had to make a decision a couple of months into COVID. How do we cope with that? Because we could not answer all the emails. It was just impossible. So we narrowed down our business to where we started from in Asia, going to Australia and New Zealand, and to a few other countries if we could fit them in, mainly from Indonesia to other countries. Our business is based in Indonesia. But the majority of our business happens in Malaysia. And the reason for that is Malaysia is the only approved country in Asia for New Zealand, besides Singapore. So people could not use Singapore, had to go to Malaysia to get their pets to New Zealand and into Australia. So it changed. So what we did, we moved 2 of our staff from Indonesia into Malaysia, and now we're priority based in Kuala Lumpur, although with our office still in Jakarta running the back end of the business. So we only have 9 employees in total that work for us. So we're only very small. So
what do you feel has actually caused this sudden increase in demand?
Probably people losing their jobs is the main priority we have seen, and wanting to change to go back home. Whether that be Australia, New Zealand, Europe, America, I would say that 90% of all those people have been because they lost their jobs.
Wow, that's quite hefty, isn't it?
Well, that's the reason most people are giving us, that we have to leave because we've lost our job. Not for any other reason. They're so disappointed they have to leave, but they have no choice. They have to go to where they can find a job.
So it's not the picture the Australian government's painting, which is that people just fancy returning home to Australia, or they're coming back because Australia's mostly COVID-free. So
Yeah, I don't know the reason behind that, and I can't comment on that because I have no experience of it. I have actually been to PQ, and I do know how the system runs after 30 years. But we made a change to Malaysia to go home for Australians via New Zealand for a couple of main reasons. And probably the main reason, and the most important one, is Malaysian Airlines never stopped during the whole COVID. No matter how things were going bad or wrong, Malaysian always departed 1 flight every month on the first Friday of every month, without fail, never failed us. So that's one of the reasons why we changed, because we could give people a guarantee of getting their pets home. Because going from New Zealand to Australia is the same. We have no issues, no problems with that, with Air New Zealand. Not Qantas, we can't use Qantas out of there either. But Air New Zealand have come to the party on that. And we can give people security. Okay, it might take 9.5 months because your pet has to stay in Malaysia for 6 months and then has to stay in New Zealand for 3.5 months. But what it gave people was security. They knew.
I suppose this is the point. That's what the timeline is. It's not sort of the level of governance from the Australian Ministry of Agriculture. It seems a little bit overbearing to me. I understand that they're trying to achieve something very important, which is to keep certain diseases out of the country. But coupled with the other areas of governance, such as the flight caps and restrictions in imports and things like that, it seems to be that you've got different areas of governance all battling each other, which introduces this massive amount of uncertainty.
Remembering with this routing that probably close to 80% of all our clients choose is the New Zealand option. Mainly for the reason I just stated.
Yeah.
We can give you a timetable, and very rarely we have to change it. 2, the New Zealand government changed the rules to help.
Right.
They adjusted their blood test dates, they adjusted their import dates. And probably the most important thing is you can actually talk to somebody on the phone who can actually change something or help you. So that was the biggest issue that most people chose it for. Coupled with that, New Zealand quarantine is run by private companies under license. And remembering we have 4 or 5 of those in New Zealand. So you don't have a date bookings. So you can actually, and their system is different. You actually get the quarantine booking before you apply for the import permit. So you get the quarantine booking, then they'll give you the import booking for that date, then you can go and book the flight. It's a simple process.
So it all
it's
ties
beautiful.
together. Yeah.
And then we avoid Australian quarantine completely. So we don't have to go to Australian quarantine at all.
That's quite a damning statement, really, isn't it? I mean, just from you as a consumer of the governance, from you as a consumer of the Australian government, to say it's easier for me to deal with another country than it is to deal with Australia, I find absolutely shocking.
Well, it was a combination of why we did that. One, for the clients, right? But one to save myself and my wife Jill's sanity.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
More than anything, because our stress levels dropped. Our first 6 months in the pandemic were just horrendous. I mean, it was just, and it wouldn't have been just for us. It would have been for all pet relocators. That had, even the longer established ones than ourselves. The stress levels, talking to them were unbelievably high. And being a member of IPATA, we got to speak on our own chat lines and our own Facebook page. So we knew what people were going through and what they were struggling with. So what we did, we came up with a surefire way. If you came to us and said, we want to get our pet home to Australia, that is the only way we'll do it. Now, Singapore is an option, but you still have to go through Australian quarantine. But Singapore, remembering that the majority of our clients come from non-approved countries for both New Zealand and Australia. Like we specialise in, we just rescued 24 pets out of Myanmar after the fighting broke out out of there. So that was a big game for us. We work in Cambodia, Vietnam, right? Thailand. We only specialise in those countries that are non-approved. So we don't
all places that aren't well known for their civil rest, are they?
Exactly. And Myanmar is a classic example of that, our road journey across Myanmar into Bangkok. Extremely expensive and extremely nervous for people because you didn't know if we could cross the border. Sometimes we had to wait at the border for 12 hours before we could cross. So we're mainly dealing...
It's a long time for animals if you're sitting there with them in crates.
Yep. Yeah, we were doing 10 at a time. But what I was trying to say here, going home to Australia, for those people, New Zealand is the only option. Because to comply with Australia, as you know, they have to get the rabies teeter test, right? And that takes weeks to get. But Singapore, you can't apply for the quarantine space till after you get the import permit.
Yeah.
After you do the rabies teeter test.
Yeah.
You can't get the import permit into Singapore. And at the moment, Singapore is on 5-month delays for quarantine. So we've got a 5 to 6 month wait anyway. Then we've got to wait in Singapore for how long is anybody's guess, because as you know, there's limited flights. So the only pets we send to Singapore are snub-nosed. The rest of our pets go via New Zealand, cats and dogs. Snub-nosed we can't send via New Zealand because Malaysian Airlines won't carry snub-nosed. So we take them into Malaysia and then we do all the requirements, and we do a road trip into Singapore, where we have private home boarding there as well. I should mention in Malaysia, we set up, after COVID, we set up private home boarding. We have a house in Kuala Lumpur that's got a 1,000 square feet yard, all set up. The dogs sleep in beds in their own rooms in the house. They're not caged in any way. They're looked after by a dog mad woman, Brenda. She plays classical music every night and gives them a treat before they go to bed. So they each have their own bed. And for the 6 months they have to stay in Malaysia, that's where they stay, and people love it.
I've got to say, people laugh at the idea of playing music to their pets, but I tell you what, our Goldies absolutely love it. Whenever we go out, if we don't put the radio on for them, then they cause absolute hell. So they love music.
But so we gave these people an option, and at the same time, we don't go into, if it's not a snub nose, we don't even go into the methods of going by Singapore, because we just won't do it. And we say to people, the only way we are prepared to do it, and the only way we can do it, is by Malaysia into New Zealand, and then either to Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, or Perth, where you can pick up your dog or your cat from the airport. So you avoid Australian quarantine completely, and also it's cheaper.
So you've been in business for over 30 years doing this sort of shipping. Have you found a big change? I mean, they spent 375 million on the PQ facility in Melbourne. Do you think that has actually improved quality, or are you seeing, you mentioned earlier that New Zealand has got multiple facilities, some of, well, all of which are privately owned and privately run, whereas with Australia, we've got a government-owned and government-run facility that has had significant taxpayer investment. Do you think that's improved matters from where it was, or do you think it's potentially there's room to grow and to make further improvements in the future?
That's a good question, because I have been to PEQ, and I've had a tour in there with IPATA during the conference in Melbourne a couple of years ago. It is first class.
Yeah.
That whoever designed that and built it is monumental. It is beautiful. Before we could quarantine in Perth or Brisbane or Sydney, Melbourne, we had multiple choices. So what they tried to do was streamline it, but they didn't see a pandemic coming, of course.
Well, you say they didn't see a pandemic coming, but these are the very people who were instrumental in building the Biosecurity Act, so 2015. So a number of years before, I mean, okay, it may have been after the facility was built, but these people were thinking about those restrictions and those issues and what would happen during a pandemic. And we have had previous pandemic scares. I would hope they were, because they wrote the documentation.
But the frontline people at PEQ are fantastic.
Yes.
The people that work there are brilliant. So this is typical of any government department. And I've dealt with Australian quarantine for more than 30 years, actually. And you learn not to argue. Because there's no sense in arguing. You'll only cause more stress to the people. Like we did personal effects before we did pets and all that, and we've had, mind-boggling problems. But it's what you deal with. I mean, the UK is not much different.
No. No, I've worked with government departments in the UK, and I can say nothing really came as a surprise coming to Australia.
Probably one of the sleepless nights I do have is when we send pets to the UK to Hark in London. That is a night I do not sleep. I'm always petrified it's not going to pass. So I don't know, but I can't really comment on how they're running it or how they're working all that out. But I believe it is improving at the moment. But we're still 3 to 4 months for vacancies in the system. So yeah. if we worried about that, our stress levels would go through the roof and we wouldn't be able to help people. But that is one of the reasons, like you mentioned, that we changed to New Zealand. We have no issues with New Zealand at all. We would be lucky to have 2 communications with MPI New Zealand on emails and the whole relocation process. It's so simple. It's just beautiful. It's beautifully run, but but that's New Zealanders. They're like that. They do step out to help you. They won't push you aside, right? They will try to help. And many times for Jill and myself, they have stepped outside the boundaries and really helped us. So much so that you'll find that a lot of other places now that are number 2 countries are using Malaysia as a transit point now for New Zealand. They send their pets to Malaysia where we transit them for 3 days, and then they go on to New Zealand. Then they go on to Australia. So a lot of other people have woken up to this as well. And I don't think that'll change until we see PEQ come back to normal. Well, airlines come back to normal levels, not PEQ. It's the airlines that are causing the problem, at the moment,
yes.
Especially Qantas. So until we get to that part, I can't see us changing our model at all. I mean, we prefer.
I think without greater insider knowledge, I can't say exactly, but I believe that the restrictions in flights are to do with the flight caps, unless that's just sort of coincidence rather than correlation. But the fact that airlines like Qantas shut down completely over the pandemic, and then, I mean, okay, we're starting to see things getting back some semblance of normality, but in some areas. Can I mention the 3 letters that everybody dreads?
Yep.
FPP. So the fit and proper person test, has it impacted on you guys particularly, or do you think it's something that is just part of doing business with Australia?
It's part of doing business with Australia. But remembering that we only had about 10 clients maybe impacted on that. And half of those have probably been handled by other agents in conjunction with us. I don't fully understand it. I've got to admit, I don't get it. But discuss it with them because I don't understand what it is, why it's there. But I've never come across it before. In all the time I've been dealing with Australian quarantine on both personal effects and freight and pets, I've never seen that before. I didn't even know it was in that legislation. So yeah, that came as a bit of a shock. So what was the second thing you wanted to say? Because I just don't know that one.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, actually, I think it's really positive that it hasn't impacted you a great deal. I suppose the worry from my perspective, in a general sense, is, well, okay, what's the next bit of legislation that's going to start biting people? But as you say, flying via New Zealand, I think is really.
Well, we switched half of those pets back. They were destined to go via Singapore. Right. When we got that, we immediately switched them back to New Zealand. So we got around that problem pretty quickly. You're going to have to remember that the New Zealand option is far cheaper too than the Singapore option. Quarantine doesn't cost as much. It's cheaper, lower cost. Import permits, lower cost.
Even though it's private, that's mind-boggling. You'd have thought that a government subsidised import process would be so much cheaper. But
yep. No, New Zealand is cheaper. The New Zealand import permit is lower cost than the Australian one because it doesn't matter how many pets, you only pay the one fee for the import permit. And don't quote me, but I think from memory it's about $230, I think, $225, something like that. But that is if it's 10 pets or 6 pets or 1 pet.
Okay, so it's actually cheaper to do multiple pets there.
Yes.
Oh, I wish we'd known that. 5 of ours.
Yeah, 5 of yours would have saved you a fortune. But you've got to remember, there's very few flights going to New Zealand as well. Qatar's still not flying to New Zealand. So Qatar was the main pet carrier into New Zealand. and Etihad
Mm.
used to do a trip there as well in China Southern. But so you would have been battling that from where you were in the UK. You didn't have much choice but to do it the way you did it, really.
Yeah, I think at the time that we did it, there weren't so many problems. I think the issues really came along when people started to realize this isn't just for a couple of months. This isn't just short term. Sort of
We're
everybody
definitely
holding back.
finding this year harder than last year.
Yeah.
Mainly because of the flights. Like we would love to send, I mean, the snub-nosed pets we're moving for New Zealand, we're still holding in Malaysia. I think we've got about 4 or 5. We're still holding for New Zealand because the people don't want them to go through Australian quarantine. They want to wait for the direct flights from Singapore.
Mm.
So we're still holding those. So there's a lot of people around the world still like holding pets like that because we just don't know until the flights come back on board. But, you know, we're very grateful to Malaysian Airlines because we wouldn't have a business without them.
Yeah.
They saved all our clients. They just saved us. Might have only been 1 flight a month. It's now 4 now. But that whole last year was only 1 flight a month. But by God, it saved a lot of people, you know, and it made it a lot easier because there's nothing, it's so much easier. We still don't understand the rule why they have to stay 90 days in New Zealand after they come out of quarantine. And we have to get retests for Lichia canis and Leishmania, right, in New Zealand. We understand that, got that. But we don't understand the 90 days. But that's been there as long as I can remember, the 90 days. So we're still at a loss why they can't come direct after they come out of quarantine. And
Yeah,
I have asked
you would have thought.
Nobody knows the answer.
Is it an Australian restriction or is it the New Zealand restriction?
I think it's a combined one.
Okay.
Yeah, I honestly don't know whose restriction it is. I haven't been able to find out any details on that at all. But it's been there as long as I can remember, that 90 days. It used to be, there's a bit of dissension. It used to be 90 days from when they arrived in New Zealand, and then some people's it's 90 days after they come out of quarantine. That's still a bit of a grey area. So we always wait the 90 days. But it's still the safest and the quickest and the lowest cost method. Because at least you can go to Sydney Airport or Melbourne Airport and straight to the terminal and pick up your pet. You know,